With just $200 in his pocket, the young William Hung Gross dreams of making a fortune in Las Vegas. Camping out at a $5 a night motel off the Vegas Strip, options were limited for Bill Gross. After a near-fatal car accident, the 22-year-old Bill Gross spent almost an entire year in the hospital. To pass the time, he started reading about the art of gambling. Then he came across a book written by mathematician Edward Thorpe. It's called Beat the Dealer. His book showed how you can beat the casinos at the game of blackjack. He read the book cover to cover. It became his holy Bible. Gross feels strongly that it is possible to get rich by gambling.
The object of card counting is to tell the player whether he's got the advantage or whether the casino has the advantage. And if the player has the advantage, then he makes a big bet. If the casino has the advantage, the player makes a small bet. So the player wins the majority of big bets, and he loses the majority of small bets typically, but comes out ahead in the long run.
To most people, getting rich by gambling is a fruitless endeavor. But not to Bill Gross. He feels a sense of confidence, backed by kind of a mathematical certainty. Methodically, Gross turned his initial $200 stake into $10,000 within 6 months, enough to pay for his MBA tuition at the UCLA. Perhaps the most well-known bond investor, Bill Gross really is in a league of his own.
Gross built PIMCO from the ground up into the world's biggest bond firm.
Yeah, well, he's beating 90% of the managers out there.
He's so large that in some ways he creates his own reality at this point.
His core portfolios has risen at an average annualized rate of 10.6% since 1973. Think about that for a second. His returns are comparable to that of a stock market index. But Bill Gross had only 3 negative years with average returns of 2.3%. But a stock market can go down as much as 23%. Not knowing it at the time, Bill Gross was born with the Asperger's syndrome.
I'm an Asperger, and Asperger's can compartmentalize. They can operate in different universes without the other universes affecting them as much. As I've understood it, in my experience, it's allowed me to stay at 30,000 feet as opposed to be on the ground. I think it was very important because it allowed me to take what we call the secular approach at PIMCO, the long-term view, and it was a good view to take as an Asperger. Now, if I was a quantitative trader, hedge fund manager, day to day, minute to minute, boom, 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 not so good.
Maybe because of Asperger's, school was easy for Gross. He was accepted to Duke University, one of the most prestigious schools in America. Hoping to learn more about his own mind, he chose a psychology major. But in the cruel turn of events, just before he graduates, a severe accident flips his life upside down. In his senior year at Duke University, the 22-year-old Gross was involved in a near-fatal car accident when his Nash Rambler skidded head-on into traffic on an icy road. He was thrown through the windshield and 3/4 of his scalp was sliced off. He spent the rest of a semester in the hospital receiving multiple skin grafts and treatment for a collapsed lung. To pass the time during recovery, the mathematically inclined Gross started reading a book called Beat the Dealer. that purported to have a new system for blackjack players. Gross liked the argument that consistently placing smaller bets with an edge will lead to a maximum return in the long run.
Ran afoul of my old blackjack maxim that said you can never bet more than 2% of your stake.
Within 6 months, he turns the initial $200 stake into $10,000, a considerable amount of money in the late 1960s. It was then and there Gross knew his future was with business. In particular, he wanted to try his gambling skills in a different kind of casino, the financial market. But just before he was ready to pursue his MBA with the money he earned, tragedy struck again. His best friend from college, almost a brother to him, was killed during the Vietnam War.
This evening, I came here to speak to you about Vietnam.
To honor the memory of his fallen friend, Gross decided he will voluntarily join the military, in spite of the fact that he wasn't drafted. For the next 3 years, Bill Gross was sent to the deep trenches of the Vietnam War, serving as assistant chief engineer aboard the USS Diachenko, transporting Navy SEALs to landing sites along the coast of Vietnam. He left the Navy in 1970 with a Tech Combat and Vietnam Active Service ribbons. As he originally intended, he enrolled in the UCLA's MBA program. The 1973 oil crisis paralyzed the US economy.
The crisis has shattered business confidence. Wall Street has slumped. Economists are forecasting the biggest recession since the Great Depression.
The 1970s saw some of the highest rates of inflation in the United States. As a result, the performance of fixed income investments was entering the worst phase in decades.
I had a friend who was a bond trader at Merrill Lynch in the 1970s. He had a job as a train conductor at night because he had 3 kids and couldn't support them on what a bond trader made.
While it was clearly not the best time to become a bond trader, Gross felt he could bring his unique insight as a gambler to the business of bond trading.
I go, Mom, and I guess I just said Mom, but Dad was there too. I said, Mom, I'm going to be the best portfolio manager in the world. And they looked at me like I was from Mars. But somehow I knew that was my goal. I didn't know what was going to happen, but that was my goal.
In 1971, Bill Gross was hired as a junior bond analyst for Pacific Mutual Insurance Company. When Gross started at Pacific Mutual in 1971, bonds weren't really traded at that time. They were kind of kept in vaults. But because of inflation being so high, it was almost impossible to make any real returns on bonds. But Gross had a solution: active trading. The idea of actively trading the bonds on a daily basis sounds risky, especially in the 70s. But Gross argues that by doing so, they could anticipate broad swings in inflation and also have the option to hedge the risk.
We got in early. We got into financial futures very early. In the early 80s, when people and clients thought that Treasury bonds and Treasury bill futures were akin to soybeans. The Treasury futures versus Treasuries was sort of a riskless arbitrage, and so we got there early, and there was a lot of alpha generated from that, not necessarily from brilliant long-term interest rate calls.
Persuaded by his strong argument, his boss at Pacific Mutual agreed to give him $15 million to form a bond portfolio. By the end of 1970s, Pacific Investment Management Co., aka PIMCO, was born. To give you an idea how crazy this sounds, it's almost like asking your parents' savings to day trade them. Although it seems risky to normal people, Bill Gross had a different idea of risk, backed by sound mathematics. Gross believes strongly that as long as he follows the gambling principles, his portfolio will always be okay. First, for every bet, there must be an edge, meaning 51% chance of being right. Secondly, each bet must be properly sized. This means placing small bets on less certain situations and bigger bets on more certain situations. Bet sizing is perhaps the most important concept in gambling, but it is often overlooked by traders in finance.
It's the only important question, basically, what are your bet sizes? So, like, all you know about poker goes through your head when you're picking your bet sizes.
It all sounds good in theory, but none of that matters if a girl fails to deliver in the real world. Since bonds weren't really heavily traded, the market was relatively illiquid. PIMCO became one of the earliest active bond traders, building and selling various positions such as mortgage-backed securities, tips, bond futures, and convertibles.
In the early 80s, when people and clients thought that treasury bonds and treasury bill futures were akin to soybeans, you had to go out. Chris Dialynis and I went out with a T-shirt said, the wave of the future. But clients said, is this like soybeans? Or are you trading corn? But the spreads were enormous in terms of value, and on and on and on. With tips and with global bonds, we got in early.
Just like gambling, Groves was playing a zero-sum game when the rest of the market didn't know the game existed. 4 years later, his bond portfolio grew to $40 million. The strategy paid off. In 1975, a year which passive bondholders struggled, Groves turning a 17.6% gain, followed by nearly 18% in 1976. Over the next 3 decades, he continued to outperform the fixed income world with an array of unique trading strategies. By the end of 1999, PIMCO grew to $3 billion. At the same time, Bill Groves saw a huge financial bubble actualizing. He warned in his monthly investment column that a dot-com bubble would soon burst, but few listened. But Groves couldn't care less. It is because he understands a crash in the stock market can be good news for the fixed income market. That same year, he and his partners sold PIMCO to Alliance for $3.3 billion. He received $233 million for his stake, and Alliance also agreed to pay him $40 million in retention bonuses. Now rich as ever, Bill Groves enjoys living a lifestyle of luxury.
According to the Wall Street Journal, Groves bought a house in Southern California's famed Newport Beach with the intent of demolishing it. The paper says he then intends to build a new one.
Although Bill Groves relishes his immense wealth and inflated lifestyle, he's still grounded in the reality of the market. One morning in 2005, while standing on his head, he saw a vision: the collapse of the U.S. housing market. PIMCO is in Southern California. Bill Groves discovered that the housing prices around that area was climbing into the stratosphere.
The fact that someone in Modesto, California would buy a home for $500,000 that had sold 24 months before at $250,000, was simply a mistake, as were the dot-coms, as were, many stocks, and as were many levered bonds and bond structures, by the way, simply 12 to 24 months ago, the subprimes being the prime example, so to speak.
At $500 a ticket, they've come to hear how to buy their very own piece of the American dream.
He wonders, is this happening all around the country? PIMCO dispatched 11 mortgage analysts to 20 cities to find out. They posed as prospective home buyers and drove around with the unsuspecting real estate agents and mortgage brokers who told them how easily they could get a home loan. In an October 2005 letter to investors, he made one of the most prescient calls of the last decade, warning of the looming subprime mortgage crisis. But everyone ignored him again.
What is the worst case scenario if, in fact, we were to see prices come down substantially across the country?
Well, I guess I don't buy your premise. It's a pretty unlikely possibility. We've never had a decline in house prices on a nationwide basis.
While Wall Street was losing big, PIMCO's total return fund was up 4.3% in 2008.
PIMCO avoided the entire subprime crisis, and our 2008 numbers relative to everybody else were more than outstanding, and has set the stage really for the next 10 years.
However, the possibility of a total collapse of the entire financial system was still imminent. The US government was desperately trying to put out the fire. They wanted to bail out the banks without creating a moral hazard. A moral hazard happens when someone takes bigger risks because he knows he's going to get bailed out. Instead, the officials come to Bill Gross for help, asking him to bail out the banks together. As a Republican, nationalizing banks goes against everything Bill Gross stands for. But as a bond speculator, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make huge profits. Bill Gross negotiated a deal with the government that is almost risk-free and guaranteed a 25% return. At the end of 2009, he had invested 61% of funds money in mortgage bonds. What makes this investment almost risk-free is that if things go south, the government is responsible for repaying all the debts on PIMCO's behalf. Following the collapse of Wall Street in 2008, Gross emerged as one of the nation's most influential financiers. Year by year, under the leadership of Bill Gross, PIMCO kept growing, having trillions of dollars under management, making Bill Gross billions in personal fortune as well. He is literally the bond king. And when you're the king, everyone wants your throne.
In a surprise move, PIMCO's Bill Gross has left the company he founded more than 4 decades ago. Gross built PIMCO from the ground up into the world's biggest bond firm. His departure caps the year of turmoil at the company, in which it was riven by destructive tensions at the top.
Due to a power struggle in 2014, Bill Gross was kicked out by the very company he founded.
So the executive committee in Allianz at some point said, this guy is got to go.
So the lesson therein is
to not to pack the executive committee or pack the Supreme Court, but to make sure you have some friends on it. I didn't have a single supporter on there.
Furious, Bill Gross sued PIMCO and received $81 million payment. At that same year, Bill Gross joined PIMCO's biggest competitor, Janus Henderson, to manage Janus Henderson's global unconstrained bond funds.
In many ways, this is a classic Bill Gross move. I mean, this guy is not interested in leaving and sort of quietly going away. He had something to prove.
But in 2019, at the age of 74, Bill Gross officially retired from active fund management.